The wind scraped low across the prairie, dragging loose snow like a dying breath. Dry cottonwoods rattled near the edge of the empty riverbed, their bark stripped raw by winter's hand. Dawn had not yet broken, but the frost-laced sky pressed down in shades of blue so deep they seemed to swallow sound. She stood with her arms wrapped tight around herself, one shoulder pressed against the side of the sod house that barely held together behind her. Her coat was too thin, buttons missing, hem stiff with old blood and ash. Her cheeks burned from cold, and her lips had split days ago. She could taste iron when she exhaled. The door behind her creaked when the wind caught it, but no one called her name. No one ever did. Inside, her children slept on a shared mattress of horsehair and rags, curled like pups against the stomach of hunger. She had not told them there would be no meal this morning. No fire either, just the cold and the long silence of waiting. Her hand dropped to her side, fingers brushing the small tin of flour she had scoured clean before dawn. She had shaken it like it might yield something if she begged hard enough. But it was empty, like the root cellar, like the man who once stood on this land and called it home. He had taken the mule, the rifle, and her pride when he left. Left nothing but names she still had to whisper each night over fevered foreheads. Her knees bent slowly as she lowered herself to the earth, the frost biting through her skirts. She pressed her palms into the dirt. It had not borne anything in years, the soil too bitter, too dry. She had tried to coax it with hope, with prayer, with sweat and silence. Nothing. The prairie took what it wanted, and still she stayed. Somewhere to the west, hooves cracked through ice, slow and deliberate. She did not look up. Coyotes tracked these parts, and so did men worse than the wolves. But she had nothing to steal, no warmth left to trade. The sound came closer, not hurried, not hesitant either. A shadow stretched long across the white crust of snow. A rider. She still did not lift her eyes. "Ma'am?" His voice was sanded down, like wood worn smooth by wind. Not young, not sharp, but something in the way he said it, like the word meant something, pulled her chin up. The man was tall on a paint horse, hat pulled low, scarf high over his mouth. Leather duster lined in sheepskin, reins loose in one hand, the other resting over the pommel of a rifle strapped to his saddle. His eyes were the only part she could see clearly, and they were not cruel. She did not answer him. She was past pleasantries. He dismounted slow, boots crunching through the snow, and reached into one of his saddlebags. "It ain't much," he said, "but it's warm." He held out a wrapped bundle. She stared at it, unmoving, her hands curled tighter on her lap. "You got little ones, I'd bet," he added, his voice even. "You don't need to say anything. Just let me help." Her jaw clenched. The last man who'd come offering help had taken her last hen and kicked in the door when she refused to give him more. Her ribs still ached from where he'd stepped on her. But this man hadn't asked to come inside. He hadn't asked for anything at all. She reached for the bundle without standing, her fingers brushing his glove as she took it. She could feel the heat through the cloth, smell it too. Bread, real bread. And something else, meat, maybe. Her throat tightened. She hadn't meant to cry, but the sound she made was too raw to stop. He nodded once, then stepped back, giving her space. "I pass through here once a week," he said, looking past her toward the low rise of the house. "Name's Walker. You need anything at all. You just leave a mark on the fence post. I'll see it." She could not find the words, so she only nodded once. He touched the brim of his hat, mounted again, and turned his horse east. The sun was starting to rise now, pale and slow, like it too was unsure whether it belonged here. She did not move for a long time. The bundle lay warm in her lap, the snow beginning to melt where it touched. When she stood, her legs shaking, she looked down at the place where he had stood. Just footprints and the smell of bread. But something else lingered, something quiet, something kind. The children were still asleep when she slipped back inside. The wind pushed the door open wider before she could catch it, and cold flooded in behind her. She closed it fast, the latch sticking, the hinge whining like it remembered better days. The light through the one window was dull and gray, slicing through the dark like a dull knife. She knelt beside them, the bundle still warm in her hands. The older boy, Clay, stirred first. He was 8, though hunger had made him small. His ribs pressed hard against the shirt she'd sewn from an old feed sack. He blinked up at her with wary eyes. She didn't smile, but she brushed his hair back and opened the cloth. The smell pulled the younger one from sleep. Miriam sat up slow, blinking like she'd forgotten the word for morning. They didn't speak. They never did first thing. Words took strength, and strength was for survival. But their eyes widened when they saw the bread. A full, round loaf with a golden top, still soft, and slices of cured venison wrapped tight in wax paper. "Where'd it come from?" Clay asked, voice thin. She didn't answer, just broke the loaf with her hands and passed it to them. She didn't take any for herself. When they were done, she tucked the cloth into her apron, not out of wastefulness. Nothing got thrown away out here. Not cloth, not paper, not even the string it had been tied with. Each bit might be useful tomorrow, or the next day. Later, when the sun climbed over the edge of the plains and brought no warmth with it, she took the children out to chop the deadfall behind the house. The wind was cruel, but work made it bearable, made it almost feel like she had a say in her life. They stacked the wood in silence, their breath rising in white puffs. She watched Clay lift a heavy branch without being told, and felt the sharp pinch of pride mix with guilt. He should not have to be this strong. When the sun was overhead, she sent them inside to warm up. She stayed behind. Her hands ached from the cold, from the weight of years. She leaned on the axe, eyes trailing out over the snow-covered hills. They rolled on forever. She'd once believed they held promise. Now, they just held silence, but a black shape moved against the white. Her heart jumped. The rider was back. She did not run to meet him, just stood where she was, hands still wrapped around the axe handle, watching. He rode in slower this time, like he wasn't sure of his welcome. "You eat?" he asked, still mounted. She nodded. "Kids?" She nodded again. He slid off the horse and unstrapped a small satchel. "Got some coffee," he said. "Some beans and cornmeal. Won't last forever, but it'll help." She looked at the sack, then back at him. "Why?" The question cracked the silence like a branch underfoot. He didn't flinch. "You're out here, same as me, and I don't believe in watching folks starve if I can stop it." She hesitated, then reached for the sack. Their hands touched again, just briefly. He smelled of smoke and horse and something green underneath it all, like cedar wood. "You got a name?" he asked. "Lena," she said. He nodded like he already knew it. "Well, Lena, like I said, name's Walker. I'll keep coming by. You need anything." "You don't want charity." "It ain't charity," he said, soft but firm. "It's neighborin'. You do the same for me." She stared at him, and for the first time in months, the stone around her chest cracked a little. He looked past her toward the house. "You got someone buried out here?" She didn't answer at first. Then, "My ma died 2 winters back. Got a cross behind the barn." He didn't ask about the others, didn't ask where her husband was, or why no one came looking for her. Maybe he already understood. "I'll be by in 4 days," he said, swinging back onto the horse. "Bring you a bit more cornmeal, maybe some nails. Looks like your roof's near ready to give out." She looked up, suddenly aware of how broken it all was. She'd stopped seeing it. That was how survival worked. Your eyes went numb. As he turned and rode off again, Lena felt something flicker inside her. It wasn't hope. Not yet. But it was something like the memory of it. Stories like these are not the end, but the beginning. Subscribe and follow their trail. The snow melted slow that week, shrinking into pockets beneath the eaves and leaving patches of black earth to show through, raw and wet like bruises. The days stretched longer, but the cold did not loosen its grip. The wind just changed direction, coming now from the south, sharp with the scent of ice thawing in the creeks. Lena patched the roof with old tin and rusted nails she scavenged from the shed, her knuckles split from the cold, her breath steaming as she worked. Clay handed her boards without complaint. Miriam followed behind with a tin pail, catching drips from the places they couldn't fix. She did not expect Walker to return. People said things in passing, promises made easy on a horse, under a blue sky. But the world had taught her not to trust things that sounded kind. Still, she watched the horizon each morning, eyes scanning the line where sky met land. And 4 days later, he came. This time he brought more than food. There was a coil of rope, a sack of seed potatoes, and a wrapped package of lard and dried apples. He carried it all in his arms without fanfare. like it cost him nothing. But she knew better. Out here, everything costs something. She met him at the edge of the yard. Her hair was tied back with a strip of linen, her sleeves rolled to the elbows. Her hands were red and raw, but she did not hide them. "You said 4 days," she said. He gave a slow nod. "I count good." They stood a moment in silence. His horse snorted and stamped behind him, impatient. "You got land enough to plant," he said, looking past her at the barren yard. "Just needs turning. I tried last year. Soil's stubborn." "So am I." He didn't smile, but something around his eyes softened. She reached out and took the bundle. "Thank you. Like I said, neighborin'." He tied the horse and walked the edge of her property with her, eyes scanning the dirt, tapping it with the toe of his boot. He asked if she had a spade. She showed him the broken one. He said nothing, but when he came back 2 days later, he brought a new one. They began working together then, side by side, hands deep in the cold ground. Lena taught Clay how to hill the rows. Miriam picked rocks from the path and stacked them into piles, her face streaked with dirt and pride. Walker did not talk much, but he moved like someone used to waiting. He listened when Lena spoke, nodded when she offered opinions about planting and woodcutting, and let her lead in her own yard. One evening, after the potatoes were in the ground, they sat by the fire out back. The children were inside, warm and sleeping. The stars were bright above, and the prairie hummed with quiet. "You always lived out this way?" she asked. He shook his head. "Grew up west of Abilene. Folks died in a fever when I was 19. Then I took to moving." "Why'd you stop moving now?" He looked at the fire a long time. "Don't know if I have, but this place feels honest." She nodded. That was all she ever wanted. Not wealth, not peace, just something that didn't lie. He glanced over. "You still expecting your man to come back?" "No." He didn't push. Didn't say sorry, didn't offer pity, just nodded like that was truth enough. A long silence passed between them, the kind that fills rather than empties. Then he said, quiet as the wind, "I ain't much. Never been married. Never built a thing I could keep. But I know how to work, and I know how to stay if I'm needed." She didn't answer. Not right away. She just sat there, hands out toward the fire, the heat slowly warming the frost inside her bones. She was not ready to trust the warmth, but she didn't pull away either. Spring rolled in quiet and muddy, washing the land in thaw and promise. The riverbed, dry for so long, held a trickle now just enough to glint under the morning sun, just enough to make Lena stop and watch it, hand shading her eyes. It made a sound she'd almost forgotten. Movement. Life. A slow, determined song. The potatoes pushed through the earth in tight green curls. Clay watched them daily, fingers twitching like he wanted to help them along. Miriam drew pictures in the dirt beside them, her stick carving tiny loops and crooked suns. Lena caught herself smiling one afternoon just watching them, the kind of smile that slipped out before she could stop it. Walker came more often. Sometimes with supplies, sometimes with nothing but time. He brought a pocket knife for Clay, after the boy proved he could split kindling without slicing his fingers. He brought cloth for Miriam, just scraps, but she turned them into ribbons, tying them through her braids with more care than Lena thought an 8-year-old could muster. He helped fix the porch steps, mended the barn roof, and once, after a late rain, patched a leak in the chimney with nothing but clay and grit. She had not asked him to do any of it. He just did. And when she tried to thank him, he'd only shake his head, as if it was her land healing him just the same. At night, Lena lay awake long after the children had gone still. She listened to the wind and let her thoughts settle like dust. She was not used to stillness that didn't feel like waiting, not used to safety that didn't come with a cost. One evening, Walker brought a small wooden box. No words, just handed it to her and stepped back. She opened it by lamplight, her breath catching when she saw what was inside. Seeds, corn, beans, squash. A simple gift, but to her it might as well have been gold. She'd traded the last of hers 2 winters ago for salt and lamp oil. She looked up at him. He stood in the doorway, hat in his hands. There was something in his eyes that wasn't demand, it wasn't even hope, it was steadiness. A man ready to put roots down if allowed. "I can't promise you anything," she said. He nodded once. "I ain't asking." But she wanted to. She found herself watching the horizon less, and the space between them more. noticing how his hand steadied when Clay leaned too close to the fire, how he always left half a biscuit on his plate if Miriam looked hungry, how he walked the land like it mattered to him, not just as dirt, but as something sacred. Lena began to speak more. Not all at once, not big stories, just bits. Her mother's laughter, her father's carved fiddle, long gone now. The sound of her baby's first cry before her first son stopped breathing the same winter. Walker listened, never filled the silence, just waited until she was done. One afternoon, the wind picked up fast and wild. A storm boiled out of the west, thick and dark. Lena scrambled to pull the wash down from the line, her hands fumbling with frozen clothespins. Walker appeared without warning, striding through the wind with that same calm pace. Together they pulled everything inside as the sky cracked open. Rain slammed the roof. Thunder shook the glass. They sat in the corner of the kitchen, soaked through, laughing without meaning to. Even Clay grinned, cheeks pink, while Miriam pressed her nose to the window, watching the lightning claw across the hills. It was the first time the house had held laughter in years. It didn't sound out of place. That night, as the storm rolled off toward the ridge, Lena lit a second lamp and set it on the windowsill. A small thing, a silent thing. But when Walker saw it as he left, he tipped his hat with a slow nod and didn't look back. The thaw brought more than green shoots and swollen creeks. It brought people. A trader came through with his wagon, bell clanging, mule breathing steam in the chill morning. He offered sugar, needles, a mirror with a crack in it. Lena bartered 2 jars of pickled beans for salt and new thread. Walker watched from the edge of the yard, quiet. She could see it in his shoulders. He didn't trust the man. Not that she blamed him. The trader's eyes lingered too long. He asked questions without asking. "You out here all alone, miss? Don't seem right. A woman doing all this herself." His voice was slick with false concern. She kept her answers short. Clay stood beside her like a shadow, eyes narrowed, hand on the small belt knife Walker had given him. The man left after a while. No harm done. But Lena bolted the door that night for the first time in weeks. Trouble didn't always wear a face. Sometimes it came in paper. A letter arrived in early May. Walker brought it, jaw tight. He handed it to her without a word. The envelope was worn, smudged with dust. She knew the handwriting before she opened it. Her husband, or the man who once wore that name. He was alive, living 3 towns west, in a boarding house, working freight lines. Said he was coming back for the kids. Said she'd failed them. Claimed she'd stolen his land. Lena stood for a long time after reading it, fingers clenched around the letter. She could feel her breath slowing, sharpening. Not fear, not sadness either. She walked out to the fence line, where Walker was coiling rope, held the letter out to him. "Do you believe this?" she asked. He read it slow, then looked at her. "Do you?" "No," she said. Walker folded the paper, tucked it into his coat, and said nothing more. But the days after grew heavier. A silence crept in, not between them, but around them, like something was watching, waiting. She checked the door more often, kept the rifle close, taught Clay how to load it, hands steady even though her stomach churned. Walker stayed longer, slept in the barn some nights, his saddle under his head, never asked to come inside, never pressed her for more. But his presence filled the space. The children began to lean toward him without realizing it. Even Miriam reached for his hand once when the wind howled too loud. Then, one dusky evening, he didn't come. The sun dropped low, the light went red, and the rider who appeared on the horizon wasn't Walker. He wore the same coat she remembered, same crooked posture, but his eyes were sharper now, meaner. He rode in slow, as if the land still belonged to him. Lena stepped out, rifle cradled in her arms. Clay stood just inside the door, ready. Miriam hidden behind the crates. The man dismounted. No smile, no greeting. Just looked at her like she was something half-built and broken. "You let my children come out," he said. "I'll be going." She shook her head. "You got no right." "I got every right," she said, voice low. "You left. You never looked back. I'm looking now." She didn't flinch. "They ain't yours anymore." He stepped forward. One boot, then the next. She raised the rifle. "You come any closer, I'll shoot." He didn't believe her. Until Walker stepped from the side of the house, shotgun in hand, quiet as dusk. "I would," he said, "and I don't miss." The man turned. Eyes flicked between them. "This ain't your concern." Walker didn't move. "It is now." The silence stretched. Then the man spat on the ground, muttered something she didn't catch, and mounted again. "This ain't over," he called, turning the horse hard. Lena's grip eased only after his shape vanished behind the ridge. Walker didn't lower the gun until she did. She turned to him, throat tight. "He'll be back." "I'll be here," he said. He didn't mean just for the fight. She heard it, felt it, and for the first time believed it. The night air was still, the kind of stillness that made every creak of the house sound louder, every breath deeper. Lena sat at the kitchen table, the rifle across her lap. The fire burned low to embers. Clay was asleep on the floor, with Miriam curled up beside him, her small hand clutching the hem of Lena's skirt, even in sleep. She didn't move it. That kind of trust was rare and precious. Walker sat across from her. Neither of them had spoken in a while. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been spoken with silence, with action, with the steadiness of showing up. Lena watched him in the flickering firelight. His coat hung near the door, still damp at the hem from walking the line around the property. He always checked the fence before dark now. Not just for animals. She hadn't asked him to. He just did. "You could leave," she said finally, her voice a whisper against the ticking of the hearth. "You don't owe us anything." Walker didn't look up, just reached for the tin cup beside him. "No," he said, "I don't." She waited, but he didn't add more. She swallowed. "He'll be back. Men like him always circle back, and if he finds someone like you here—" "I ain't afraid of him," Walker said, gentle but firm. She searched his face. "Then what are you afraid of?" He looked at her then, really looked, and there was something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Not fear, not hardness, just a kind of longing so naked it made her breath catch. "Letting you down," he said, "letting them down." Lena's throat closed. She looked away. For years, she had survived by expecting the worst, preparing for it, building her life on sharp edges and hard choices. Hope had been too dangerous, too tender. But here was a man who had offered nothing but consistency. Not promises, not sweet words, just presence, hands that worked, eyes that saw her, a voice that never rose in anger, a heart that stayed. "You haven't let us down," she said, barely more than a breath. The room felt suddenly full, not with danger, but with something like peace. Walker leaned back in the chair, his eyes soft. "You said once you couldn't promise me anything." "I remember. You still feel that way?" She looked down at Miriam, asleep and safe. At Clay, already dreaming of horses and wide-open fields. At the house that somehow no longer felt like a coffin but a shelter. "I can promise you one thing," she said slowly. "If you stay, you won't be alone." Walker let the words settle. Then he nodded once. The fire cracked, a log shifting, sparks rising. "I'll stay." They didn't touch. Not yet. But something passed between them that felt more solid than a kiss, more lasting than a vow. In the morning, Walker went to town. He brought back a ledger, more nails, a small jar of peppercorns for Lena, and a worn book of fables for the children. He started fixing the shed into a room of his own. "Not the barn," he said, "something better." Lena helped him. Together they framed the walls, cut the boards. They worked in rhythm, her hand passing him nails, his voice pointing out strong joints in the wood. She didn't ask what he was building toward. She already knew. One afternoon, Clay tugged at Lena's skirt. "Mama," he whispered, "can he be our pa?" Lena knelt beside him, smoothing his hair back. "He's not here to replace what was," she said. "He's here to give us something new." Clay nodded. That was enough. The days warmed. The potatoes grew strong. Beans sprouted. Corn reached tall under the sun. The land gave back, finally. And on one quiet evening, with the wind soft through the trees and the smell of new hay in the air, Walker took Lena's hand beneath the old cottonwood and placed something small in her palm. A ring. Simple. Iron. Forged from the broken hinge of her old barn door. Not fancy. Not bought. Built. Together. She closed her fingers around it and didn't cry, just looked at him and said, "Yes." He pulled her close, and the prairie around them seemed to sigh, like the land itself approved. The summer came slow and steady, like a deep breath held and finally exhaled. The sky stretched wide each morning, painted in the soft oranges and pinks of days not yet ruined. The soil, once stubborn and dead, now cradled the green things they had planted. Rows of corn moved with the breeze like they had a soul of their own. Lena stood at the edge of the field, her hands pressed to the small of her back. The morning sun warmed her shoulders, and the air smelled of dust and life. Behind her, the house stood taller than it ever had, though nothing had changed but the way she saw it. Walker's work was everywhere now, in the straight lines of the mended fence, in the lean-to that stood beside the barn, in the way the porch didn't sag anymore when she stepped onto it. But more than that, he was in the rhythm of their days, in the way Miriam ran to meet him when he returned from checking the traps, in the way Clay asked his opinion before fixing the chicken coop, in the way Lena turned to find him already holding what she needed before she could ask. Some evenings, they'd sit out past dark, the children inside, the fire snapping low. Walker would play the harmonica, slow and quiet, like the music was meant to be a secret between the two of them. Lena didn't speak much during those moments. She didn't need to. The stillness said enough. But peace never came without a test. Late one afternoon, while Walker was in town and the children played near the stream, a figure came riding from the ridge. Lena saw the dust trail first, then the glint of metal in the sun. She went inside and reached for the rifle. The rider pulled up hard near the house. Her husband, no. The man who once called himself that. His face was thinner, angrier, hollowed by something she couldn't name. Maybe shame, maybe spite. "You made this look easy," he said, eyes scanning the house, the yard, the children in the distance. "It wasn't," Lena said. The rifle stayed in her hands. She didn't lift it yet. "You think this changes anything?" he asked. "You think planting a few beans and taking in a hired hand makes you something you ain't?" "I'm not hiding," she said. "You're the one who ran. I came back." "No," she said, voice steady. "You came to take." His jaw twitched. "They're mine. I've got a right. You had that right once. You gave it away." He stepped forward and she raised the rifle. Not high, just enough. He stopped. From behind, the sound of hooves. Fast. Urgent. Walker rode in hard, his horse lathered with sweat. He dismounted without speaking, shotgun loose in his grip. The two men stood staring, one of them lean and slick with old intentions, the other grounded, heavy with earned purpose. "You don't belong here," Walker said. The man laughed. "What are you, some drifter pretending at family?" Walker didn't rise. "No, I'm just the man who stayed." Lena spoke then. "You need to go. If you come back again, it won't be words." Her former husband looked at her for a long time, but he saw it, in her eyes, in Walker's stance, in the land behind her that now bore fruit instead of failure. He spat in the dirt and turned his horse. They watched him disappear into the distance. When the dust finally settled, Lena let the rifle fall to her side. Walker moved beside her, one hand resting on the small of her back. "You all right?" She looked at him, then past him, at the children, at the field, at the life they had built with nothing but time and grit. "I am now," she said. Autumn came like a prayer answered in small whispers. The corn ripened, heavy and golden. The beans dried on the vine, rattling softly in their pods like secrets ready to be shared. Each day the air turned a little crisper, the shadows a little longer, and Lena felt a quiet fullness settle deep inside her like a hunger she'd lived with for years was finally sated. They harvested together, all four of them, hands stained with soil and sweat. Clay carried baskets to the porch, proud and sure-footed. Miriam tied scraps of ribbon around each jar of preserved tomatoes, humming to herself. Walker moved through the field with easy strength, shirt damp at the collar, a quiet half-smile beneath the brim of his hat every time Lena caught his eye. The house smelled of wood smoke and apples. Bread rose in the pan each morning. Boots stayed by the door, worn but polished. There was a place for everything now, a rhythm. On Sundays, Walker read from the old Bible Lena's mother had left her. His voice wasn't preachy, just steady. She listened, not always for the words, but for the way his voice filled the room, made it feel like a promise kept. He slept inside now. There hadn't been a moment, a conversation, just a quiet merging of routines, his coat on the same peg, his tools on the same bench, his presence part of the air she breathed. He took up space, like someone who'd always belonged there. Not loud, not urgent, just there. One morning, she found him fixing the latch on the chicken coop. Miriam beside him with a piece of chalk, drawing on the side of the wood. "What's that?" Lena asked, crouching beside her. Miriam grinned, tooth missing, hair in uneven braids. "It's our family." Lena looked. 4 shapes, too tall, too small, simple lines, messy but full of joy. In Miriam's drawing, Walker held Lena's hand. She didn't say anything, just kissed her daughter's head and looked over at the man working quietly beside her. That night, she pulled a box from beneath her bed, the last thing she owned from before. Inside was her mother's shawl, a pair of baby shoes, and a folded linen cloth wrapped around a small bundle. A locket. She hadn't worn it in years. She opened it slowly. Inside, her parents' faces stared back, faded but steady. She stared at them for a long time. Then she stood and walked out to the porch, where Walker sat sharpening a blade by lantern light. She sat beside him, pressing the locket into his hand. He opened it, looked, then looked at her. "I want you to know where I come from," she said, "so you understand what it means that I'm staying." He didn't speak, just closed the locket and held it in his hand a moment longer before giving it back. "You still got it hard some days," he said softly. "I do. Me too." They didn't need more than that. When the first snow came, it blanketed the fields like a final word on the season. The roof held, the fire crackled, and Lena stood at the window, watching her children race through the white, Walker not far behind, boot prints trailing close. She placed her hand on her stomach, quiet. She hadn't told him yet, not out of fear, but because the moment hadn't called for words. It would come. She'd tell him soon. Maybe tonight. Maybe in the stillness before dawn. But for now, she just watched them, her children, her man moving through the snow like they'd always been meant to belong together. The house behind her was no longer a place of shelter. It was a home. If you want to hear more voices rising from dust and despair, subscribe now.